Hey guys, I am DM Zone. This is the Gamers Oasis. We're going to talk about Basic Expert Edition of Dungeons and Dragons. Okay guys, so like I was saying before, this is the Basic Expert Edition of Dungeons and Dragons, often referred to simply as just BX. BX is the Mulvey version of Dungeons and Dragons. It came out in 1981. The original game for Dungeons & Dragons, or OD&D as they call it, is referred to, was made in 1974. And that ran until it became the Holmes edition, which was revised by Holmes, and then later by Mulvey, which just gives you the BX version. There wasn't a lot of difference between Holmes and the original. It was just more of a clarification, and Editor got its hands on the product and went ahead and made some changes that I feel helped clarify a lot of what the author was trying to articulate. Okay, now at the same time, or during part of this time, as the basic version of the game was coming out, they came out with the advanced version of the game, and they called that AD&D. And first edition AD&D basically was running parallel at the same time as the BX version of the game. They used different systems. There was a different thought on how the game was supposed to come out, and there's a lot of competition. I'm not saying in this video which one I think is better. I just think that it's important to know that there's a difference between the two. In addition to the BX version of the game and the AD&D version of the game, there was also the continuation, I guess you could say, of the BX version. They called that the BECMI, the BECMI version. What that is Basic, Expert, and then it came out with 3 additional books called Champion, Master, and Immortal. These books took you from level 14 all the way to level 36. It changes a lot of the dynamic of the game. For example, you can ascend to become a god. It has you traveling to other planes of existence, where more BX was without heaven and hell, more just right there in the prime material, a more simple version of the game that without all the morality maybe of that type of stuff. Even though it does play a lot into the morality of the game, it doesn't try and do that necessarily at the top, and basically from the characters out is what they're trying to do. So that's an important thing to say. Now there is something to be said. There's sort of a saying, I guess, maybe, I don't know if other people say it, but I've said it, that all demi-humans are classes, but not all classes are demi-humans. So it's kind of turning a famous phrase, I guess you could say, and putting it on its ear. What I'm trying to say with that is that all dwarves, halflings, and elves are warriors, or that are magic users and that type of stuff, but not all clerics, fighters, or warriors, what you're going to call them, magic users and thieves are demi-humans. There is the human race. Matter of fact, of that, only humans can be thieves or clerics, if I'm not mistaken. Later on, there are some versions of thieves that can come out, like actually before BX came out, there are half elves and that type of stuff, and half orcs, and then that came out very quickly after OD&D. And then the question is, do you incorporate that into your BX game, or do you just keep it very classic and core set to what Gygax was kind of thinking about with this? I leave that up to you. I'm not trying to get into that too much in this discussion, but I did want to talk about that briefly. So there are 6 different stats that are used in the BX version, in all versions of the game, of Dungeons & Dragons, that is. There's the strength, there's the dexterity, there's the con, there's the intelligence, there's the wisdom, and there's the charisma. I'm not going to go into that. I have a slide up right now for you to take a look at, and I think you get the general idea of what I'm saying with this. But some of the things that are different is there are things called prime requisites. Prime requisites have a modifier to your experience that you gain based upon your primary stat. Your primary stat being for like fighter would be strength, and for magic user would be intelligence, and so on and so on. So once you have your primary stat and you're going up in those things and you're doing those things, then you can understand how that 10%, because you're more adept, you're naturally attuned to that type of class. So you're able to gain more experience that way. And if you have low stats, then you are, even though you're forcing to become a fighter, even though you're like a 5 strength, then you gain experience less with less speed, and you level slower. And I think that's an interesting way of doing it. I think the reality is probably more great than what they interpret it, but at least they're trying to discuss that topic in a game that is fairly simple. That said, there's also less alignment. I talked a little bit about this fact there's like really no heaven, there's no hell, so there's no devils, there's no demons, there's no angels, and that type of stuff. But that's also representing the cosmology of the game. There's no alignment for good and evil. There's law, there's neutrality, and there's chaos. Chaos does not necessarily mean evil. I think that's something that you give it later, but it does mean that you're a little more random, you're a little bit less trustworthy, you're a little bit more self-interested if you push towards the neutrality line. Neutral is actually still negative for most people, at least if you consider yourself law, because it's all mostly self-interest. It's mostly about you don't care what other people are doing, positive or negative. It's not really your stick. You just kind of want to be left alone, do your own thing. Whatever your gain is, I think is what you aim for. Maybe I've mischaracterized that, and I need to go back and look at that more. But from what I have read and the few things I've read, that's kind of how it's described to me. Law, on the other hand, supposedly leaning more towards good, and that I don't think these exactly translate perfectly, but that's kind of what they're saying. I think that you can go too far into the order of law, that you are callous and cold, and that you don't actually feel emotion towards people. You're just, this is the law, type of thing. And I don't think that is good. I think that leans probably towards evil. But in this version of the game, like I said, I think you can be both lawful and evil, and be good and be lawful. Just like a person can be like Robin Hood and be good and be chaotic, but in their heart they're still doing things for the right reasons. So the alignment's a little bit different. There may be better versions of alignment out there. Maybe this is being poorly explained, and it's actually a great manner to do alignment. Let me know down in the comments below what you guys think, and we'll have more of a discussion on this. So in this version of the game, they've moved nearly completely away from using the chainmail rules of the game. Originally, the D20 form of attack, and I'll just refer to that as that for right now, was an optional rule that was very complicated, but it was better than maybe the 2d6 rules of chainmail. I kind of like the 2d6, but there certainly is some negatives to them. When they came out with the D20, it was well received, but people were using it as option rules even in the tournament play before the game was officially using this method of doing it. So they went ahead and moved to it. What they called it was THAC0, 2-hit armor class 0. Now, THAC0, in by itself, is basically of the devil, so they were kind of wrong saying that they didn't have it. I have learned how to translate this THAC0 into plain speech because I played through 3rd edition. I was using THAC0 properly, I guess you could say, as 3rd edition does, before 2nd edition came out, and they made this change. This change, to me, seems logical. Essentially, I won't get into it right now. THAC0 is kind of its own video, but they made THAC0 extremely negative. The higher, the more protection you have in wearing your armor, the lower your armor score is. So a 10 is far worse than a 7. So if you're wearing leather armor and you don't have any dexterity modifier, then you go ahead and drop from a 10 to a 7. If you have chainmail, you drop to a 5. If you use a shield, you drop to a 4. Make sense? If you have plate mail, you drop to a 3, and if you have plate mail plus a shield, you drop to a 2. And basically, that's where you are. That's going to be the best thing you can have for a long time until you get some sort of magical armor or magic shield. and that's kind of how armor class goes. And the higher your level is, the more bonuses, and I'll leave that in air quotes, that you have to drive that number down so you can hit AC2 or whatever you need to hit easier. Okay, spent too long on THAC0 as it is. So armor and weapons and that type of stuff are made far more simple. I've already named off all the different types of armor there are. Weapons, you get into a short list of weapons again. Most of these are probably more abstract versions, so if you wanted to have a katana, it would do the same damage as a longsword probably, and you would just have katana slash longsword, so that in the notes you knew why you were doing the damage you did and why it was what it was. This game is very big about changing up what the paper says so that it's cool and that it's interesting. They just see that as a mechanic. So katana would do the same damage as a longsword, so the mechanics of the game didn't change and you didn't affect how much damage a particular person was doing or whatever based upon something that was cool. Cool just meant cool. It didn't mean that it did something different or better. That's something later additions of the game tried to do, and for whatever success you might deem that to be. Anyways, let me move on. Alright, so initiative is going to fall into the combat scenario. Combat scenario, you have a bunch of things, and initiative is one of those things. So two people run into each other, you have to roll to see first if they're surprised. One or two, they're surprised, and three or higher, they're not. Some bonuses are out there, some negatives are out there. How far apart you guys is a very important thing when this roll is made. Because you may or may not be able to reach each other in the first round, and it may be a moot point. So being confined in tight spaces like a dungeon is going to mean you're usually going to be at a shorter distance, and surprise is more valuable than if you're crossing a meadow and there's an orc at 65 feet. There's going to be a difference between these two things. There's monster reaction tables. When two creatures run into each other, there's a possibility of some sort of reaction happening, and then from that you have combat. They run away, you enter discussion. If nothing happens and you have an opportunity to talk, then you might be able to talk yourself out of combat or into combat depending on your ability to talk, and usually that involves dice rolls. Once you get past surprise, once you get past the monster reaction table, then you actually go into initiative if there is going to be combat. Initiative is declared at the beginning of the turn, and then you state what you're going to do, whether it's going to be move, whether it's going to be shoot range attacks, whether it's going to be cast spells, or it's going to be melee. And then you go ahead and roll initiative to see who goes first. It's on a d6. There are some benefits to this, but they're very few because it is a d6. You don't want to skew that number too much. When it is the party's turn to go, if that matches exactly with the enemy's turn to go, because it is team combat as an initiative, I guess you could say, then it's considered simultaneous, and anything that would happen would automatically happen at the same time everything else is happening. So if you kill a creature with ranged and that creature is in melee, it still gets to attack with its melee before it dies. If you do the same thing but you attack before them and you hit a caster with a ranged weapon or melee or even another spell, then that spell is considered negated. Now, you attack a magic user and you both go Simo, and the spells land on each other or land on one of those magic users. Because it's simultaneous, that spellcaster still gets to cast their spell. It's a very complicated way of saying that it will make sense when you play the game. Essentially, there's different turns to every combat phase. It goes movement, ranged, magic, and then melee. And if you are in different initiatives, then your team gets to do all of that before the other team or after the other team, depending on if you rolled higher or lower than they did. Magic in general is going to be a huge topic. There's arcane and then there's divine. There's also a lot to talk about with wilderness and dungeon and exploration. I'm not going to get into those things right now. I'm not going to get into henchmen and allies and retainers and hirelings. those are all for probably a different video, because those are all very lengthy and involved in that type of stuff. So I'm doing a whole series on Basic Expert, the BX version of Dungeons and Dragons. Please follow along to see that, and eventually I'll be running in the Search of the Unknown, and then I'll be running other B series module. Part of the thing I enjoy is not only running my own stuff, which I'm very fond of, but to experience and to run the classics. And I consider all the B modules to be classic Dungeons and Dragons, and I feel like I'm paying respect and homage to these great modules that help to get the game up and going and turn it into what it is today. So please like, subscribe, let me know what you guys think down below. Let me know if there's something specific you want me to talk more about. I have a series of videos, like I said, I'm planning to release, but maybe you can direct me to something that maybe I forgot or missed, or maybe there's something you want me to tackle first. That would be better to explain these videos. So thank you, I appreciate it, and let's keep rolling those dice.